I always make a right at the stop sign. I decided to just wait, and I fooled him. I should probably introduce myself. I'm Mike Brody. This is the strange rabbit that hangs across the street from my guitar shop. This is my band. The lame way people try to rationalize this away is like you don't decide what you're going to admit exists as you walk down the street. There are no yellow cars, no such thing. It's circular thinking. Well, here comes one. I don't see it because you're not going to look. You know, you can't argue this while you're not looking at it. You have to be willing to go against everyone. I never had plans to fool the whole world with UFO videos, which, quite frankly, have destroyed my life in many conventional ways. I'm not high tech, I don't do AI, there's nothing in this. I hardly even used any filters. The instrument I'm playing here is a 10-string Puerto Rican cuatro. I found this at a pawn shop. I didn't know till far after playing this that these were made by monks to summon the Virgin Mary. And I remember thinking, could that have caused all this? And that would be a funny thought, except at my grandson's bris ceremony, I was able to videotape this in the sky over the trees. I've been shown everything. This thing all started, a friend of mine was like, why you? And I actually had to think about it for a while. When I was in 6th grade in 1973, we were tested for IQ and a strange other test, psychic ability. There were these cards with symbols, and we were supposed to guess what each symbol was attached to, a thought or some representation. Next morning, I got called to the library. I had to retake that test. This time I was observed by men with suits and name tags. When I got home from school that day, those men were in my kitchen with my parents. They were discussing relocating to Washington, D.C. because I had scored the highest test score on the psychic test ever scored. None of this was to my liking. I did not want to be different. I did not want to be put with those smart kids that never talked. I did not like these guys. I did not like the fact that they wanted us to move, and I protested. Nothing became of it, and was soon forgotten, never talked about again hardly. I totally put it away until now, when I remembered it recently, working on this, and I started researching that test. And it turns out they were looking for people to communicate to the aliens. And right off the bat, I knew I was dealing with a language here. A visual language I understood. There is no doubt this is 3 student UFO pilots in their locker room having a bathroom break. Look at their shoes in the shoe rack. Look how they're all looking at the right point of focus. Look how they're having a cigarette, but one of them has it in his nose the way teenagers do. And that's why me. Because I can. Did you hear that scream? It's gonna happen again in a couple seconds. That wasn't there when I videotaped this. And while I was reviewing it, an employee of mine who's studying ancient Mexican culture walked by and heard it. And he said, I just heard an Aztec death whistle. And I freaked out because look at these guys. These guys showed up on the guitar I was building in 2019 after I was sanding a piece of wood for a pickguard, and I took pictures of them. That guy in the middle was a piece of the sandpaper I used. All this came from the paper towel I wiped off the sanding dust with. Nobody has done any artwork in this thing. These are photos I took originally. The Aztec entanglement goes deeper now. Last year, driving around, I passed a pizza place my friend had recommended, so I decided to stop in for lunch. The waitress put me next to the only other people in there at a booth. These people looked unusual, ancient. They had 6 kids. They looked the same age, and they're staring at me over the booth, a few inches from me. Just emotionless, black-eyed, staring. I decided to take a trip to the bathroom for a few minutes, just to get a break from those X-ray eyes. I could hear the guy from in there. He was freaking out, the waitress, because he was like, is that Roma on that map? How can he be so surprised by it? I finally came back, no change, just the same staring, and the guy still infatuated with the map on the wall. The waitress comes over. I'm like, I'd really like to pay now. And she says, oh, but sir, that gentleman there paid for your dinner, and you have dessert and coffee coming. He never even looked at me. These were individual pictures of progress sanding this piece of wood that caught my attention, that look like Aztecs, that are communicating different emotions but never lose being who they are. It's not possible. Then again, neither are the buildings left behind that these people did not build. They say they didn't. It is not an insult to them to say that they inherited these things. Machu Picchu and Chichen Itza and all these massive pyramidal structures, and beyond that, built on the top of the highest mountains with water sources still running and incredibly sophisticated systems still working that professors in colleges are not permitted to talk about unless they say built by people wearing loincloths using rocks.